Come to next one example we will solve. Next paragraph, there is an example. Remeasurement arising from a change in the future lease payment resulting from a change in the index. Underline resulting from a change in the index. On 1st January 20x1, entity A leases a property for a lease term of 8 years. So what is the original term? 8 years. The lease payment for the first 3 years have been agreed at currency unit 100 rupees per year. The lease payment will be reset on 1st January 2004. Let us call it 2004. Why 2004? Because after 3 years, which means year 1, 2, 3, 100, 100, 100. And then they will revise it on 1st January 2004 and subsequently on 1st January 2007. Why 2007? Again after 3 years. After 3 years they are revising the rent on the basis of increase in the retail price index RPI for the preceding 3 years. For the preceding 3 years, all the lease payments are made at the underline end of the relevant year, because if it is beginning, your calculation would change. So in the exam you be careful with this timing of lease payment. Beginning or end will change your answer completely. On 1st January 2001, that is the commencement date, the RPI is 100 rupees. So easy for calculation purpose. RPI is 100 and your currency first lease payment is also 100. An entity A measure the lease liability at 646. Now how did they calculate 646? In the exam you will have to calculate it. Check on your calculator. What is the installment period? 8 year. And how much is the interest rate implicit in the lease? 5% given below. So just take on your calculator 1 divide by 1.05. If your calculator has GT function, press equal to 8 times. Press GT function. You will get some factor 6 point something. Multiply by 100 and round off. Is it approximately 646? Yes. So what you will do in the exam, if this question comes, first you will calculate what is the lease liability on commencement, which is equal to present value of rupees 100 for 8 years at 5% discount rate. Okay. Then next paragraph. On 1st January 2002, 3, 4, respectively RPI. What is RPI? Retail price index. Is 103, 107 and 108. Now see, some data is given to confuse you. This revision will be done only after 3 years. So this and this is not relevant. The RPI on this date is relevant, which is 108. So what will be your lease rental now? When it was 100, my lease rental was 100. So when it is 108, my lease rental will also become 108. My lease rental will become 108 for subsequent period. Is it right? Simple arithmetic. Index is 100, rent is 100. So if index is 108, rent will also be 108. Small arithmetic you have to apply. In its first financial statement for the year ended 31st December 20x1, in its financial statement 31st December 2 and 31st December 3, entity A makes no adjustment for increase in RPI because there is no change in the cash flow in this year. So this first and second RPI given to you is to be ignored. Okay. This is the instruction you will follow in the exam. In the exam, they will not be so liberal and give all the explanation. They will only say the RPI was so and so much amount on these 3 years. In its financial statement for year ended 31st December 2004 and subsequently 2007, entity A recalculate its liability on the increased RPI. These adjustments are added to the carrying amount of the lease liability and to the related right of use asset. Is it right? Now the question is, how will you calculate how much would be change in the lease liability on these two dates, that is 31st December 2004 and 31st December 2007. Okay, how will you calculate that change? So for that, to understand this table, only pay attention on the screen. In the first year, my opening lease liability is 646, agreed, tick mark, no adjustment in the first 3 year, 0, 0, 0 adjustment. You will calculate interest on this at 5%, 32. Repayment will be first 3 year 100, 100, 100. Okay. So what you do, you keep doing the checking whether what we are discussing is right. Now tell me whether the balance in the first year is 578. Say yes. Yes. 578 into 5%. 29. Payment 100, balance 507. 507. Then 25 will be the interest rounded off. Minus 100, 432. Now 432 is my carrying amount. Is it right? So what you will have to do, you will have to calculate, see on the screen that your CPI has changed to 108 now. CPI has changed to 108. So because of that, my liability at this point will change. In the year 2004, it will change. So how it will change? There is a note written below. In the exam, this important calculation you will have to perform. That is the difference between 5 remaining payment of currency unit 100 discounted at 5% and 5 remaining payment of currency unit 108 discounted at 5%. I will explain to you this point because in the exam this calculation the student has to perform. When I reach this year 2004, I find that the consumer price index has changed to 108, because of which now my rental will be based on 108. I don't know what will happen in 2007. Right now we are in this year only. We are the accountants of year 2004 and I find that the rent has changed to 108. So we will assume that this 108 will be applicable for remaining 5 years now. So what you will do, as I have discussed, for change in index, do not change the discount rate. Change the same, use the same rate. So calculate 108 into PV annuity factor, 5 remaining year and 5%, which comes to, check whether this factor is 4.3294. Is it right? And 100 into this 5 year and 5%, which you need not calculate also. If you want, you can just take this figure, 432. So my revised liability will be this amount, which I am underlying right now, and my existing liability is this amount, which is there in your book already. Is the difference 35? Yes. So on 1st January or April, what is that? January. On 1st January 2004, will pass one entry, asset account debit, right of use asset account debit to lease liability 35. So now my liability will become 432 plus 35 is how much? into 5%, 23. So maybe these people have taken 22. So now on 432 at 5% it comes to how much? So maybe they should have taken 23 anyway. So now 108 you'll pay, and now your balance will be 432 plus 35 plus 22 minus 108. Is it 381? Now 381, no adjustment in the next 2 years. Calculate 5% on that number. 19, 108 payment, 292 balance. 292 balance, no adjustment, take 5%. Is it 16? Approximately 15. So that 1 rupee they have adjusted here. 108. Okay, happy. And balance 200. 200. Wait. Again. What is your index now in 2007? 113. So if index is 113, your rent will also become 113. Why? When index is 100, rent is 100. When index is 113, rent will also be 113. For 2 more years, you have to pay 113 now. So what I'll do, I will now calculate the rent for remaining 2 years using 113. So calculate 113 into PV annuity factor, 2 year and 5%. Calculate 1 divided by 1.05. 2 times equal to. Then press GT into 113. So that will give you some value minus your opening value 200 here. Is the difference 9 or 10 rupees here? Around 10 rupees. No problem. So maybe just 1 rupee adjustment, 9 rupees they have done. Okay. So 9 or 10 rupees you can write here. After that, calculate the interest. 200 plus 9 into 5%. Is it 11? You will pay 113. 107 balance. 107 last year no adjustment into 5%. Approximately 6. Make it 113. So last year what you can do, you can make the interest as a balancing figure also, because this amount is already logged and this figure has to become 0. Okay. This is an example on change in liability due to change in index. Second effect of this 2 figure will go to right of use asset, and their depreciation calculation will also change accordingly. If they would have asked the asset account also, then you would have done this adjustment there also. Next paragraph, foreign currency exchange. Why they have brought foreign currency exchange here? It has been observed that many aircrafts which companies use are leased one. And who are these lessors? These are the big foreign companies. Okay, Airbus, Boeing, and like that. So therefore, your liability will be measured in foreign currency, because you have to pay the amount in foreign currency. One more standard will apply. Effect of changes in foreign exchange rate. Okay. And then at the end of the year, now the question will be asked, what about the lease liability? Will it require revaluation at closing rate or not? So one has to see whether it is a monetary item or a non-monetary item. If it is a monetary item, closing rate will apply. So you have to calculate your lease liability at the end of the year if it is in foreign currency by applying closing exchange rate. And if you apply closing exchange rate, there is a possibility that there will be exchange difference. And if there is an exchange difference, the question will arise will you transfer the exchange difference to P&L account, or will you adjust in the right of use asset? Because you have been learning that whenever there is a change in liability, adjust in right of use asset, but not for foreign exchange difference. This foreign exchange difference is not due to any change in the liability as such, because you don't have to pay more or less amount to the lessor, but it is because of the change in exchange rate. So which standard will get precedence here? The standard on foreign exchange. Transfer the difference to P&L account, because this issue can arise in the minds of people. Can I adjust the exchange difference in the right of use asset because my liability is changing? So you will say no. One more example we'll take now. You will see one example is printed below this paragraph. Small example. Measurement by a lessee and accounting for a change in lease term. Okay. This time, previous problem we had changed the index. Now we'll change the lease term. If there is a change in lease term, will you use a new discount rate or the old discount rate? New. Revised discount rate. Very good. It seems you have been learning and attentive. So part 1, initial measurement of right of use asset and liability. Same illustration will be converted into a question format in the exam. Lessee enters into a 10-year lease. Lessee enters into, underline 10-year lease. Underline 10-year of a floor of a building, because that is an important variable, with an option to extend for 5 years. Underline option to extend for 5 years. So 10-year, if you want, you can extend it for another 5 years. Lease payments are 50,000 currency unit per year during the initial term, and currency unit 55,000 per year during the optional period, which means first 10 year it will be 50,000, but if you decide to extend the period, then 11 to 15 it will be 55,000. 1 to 10, 50,000, 11 to 15, 55,000. To make your life little miserable, all payable at the beginning of each year. Underline beginning of each year, because that interest factor calculation sometimes becomes difficult. So keep in mind, payments will be made at the beginning of each year. Underline. To obtain the lease, lessee incurs initial direct cost of currency unit 20,000. So this is initial direct cost, and the distribution is 15,000 is related to a payment to a former tenant occupying that floor of the building, and currency unit 5,000 relates to commission paid to real estate agent that arranged the lease. Both will qualify for initial direct cost, because these costs are incurred to obtain the lease in the process of securing the lease, and would not have been incurred had you not entered into a lease transaction, correct? So this is called initial direct cost. That also I will add. As an incentive to the lessee for entering into the lease, one more variable. Lessor agreed to reimburse to the lessee the real estate commission of 5,000. So this 5,000 they are reimbursing, and they are also reimbursing the lessee's leasehold improvement of 7,000. Will this be deducted from the right of use asset? Will both be deducted, or only 5,000 be deducted from right of use asset and 7,000 being related to something other than right of use asset? Lease improvement is not right of use asset. It is like you might have done some construction work, designing work on your leased asset, and for that they have given you the reimbursement. That will not be adjusted. Underline. Leasehold improvement reimbursement is not to be adjusted here, but will be adjusted there in the leasehold improvement cost. Not in this case. This is not the you can say the lease incentive related to lease. It is related to some lease improvement. At the commencement date, lessee concludes that it is not reasonably certain to exercise the option to extend the lease. First, what is my initial conclusion? Not to extend. So what is the lease term I will use for my calculation? 10 year. Means I am going to pay 50,000 rupees for 10 years, but at the beginning of the year. So for calculating the present value, what is the borrowing rate, incremental borrowing rate? 5%. So take your calculator. You first compute the present value factor for 9 years. 1 divided by 1.05. Press equal to 9 times. Press GT. Multiply by 50,000 plus 50,000. One more 50,000 at the beginning. 1 you will pay now, 9 you will pay later. Equal to. Is your answer around how much? 355, 391? Plus 50,000. So 4,05,391. Are you getting 4,05,391 on your calculator? Out of that 50,000 you will pay now. So the liability will be 355,391 and the asset will be, before adjusting for this direct cost and what is that? Incentive, will be 4,05,391. Now see the journal entry on the date of commencement of the lease. So the question can be passed journal entry on the date of commencement of the lease. First entry would be right of use asset account debit 4,05,391. This figure you have got on your calculator just now. That is the total lease liability you have to pay in present value terms. And because we have paid 50,000 just now, I will credit liability 355,391 and I will credit bank 50,000. Otherwise you can pass two entries if you want here. Right of use asset to lease liability 4,05,391, lease liability to cash 50,000, being lease payment of the first year paid in advance. Then this party, that is the lessee, has incurred 20,000 initial direct cost. Right of use asset account debit 20,000 to cash or bank account 20,000 being initial direct cost. Then cash account debits 5,000 to right of use asset account 5,000 being lease incentive relating to lease paid by the lessor. There is a note below, underline. What is the treatment of reimbursement of leasehold improvement? What is the treatment of reimbursement of leasehold improvement? 1. The lessee accounts for the reimbursement of leasehold improvement from the lessor applying other relevant standard and not as a lease incentive applying IFRS 16 or 116. Okay. This is because cost incurred on lease improvement by the lessee are not included within the cost of the right of use asset. Underline the reason. When there is a lease improvement, those costs also we don't add to the right of use asset. So reimbursement of such cost will not be deducted from the right of use asset. This is commencement date entry. Any question? Commencement date entry is clear? Only this much can also be asked in the exam. Up to commencement date, what entry you will pass? and the important thing you have learned, if there is a reimbursement of this lease improvement, that will not be adjusted in the right of use asset. Now next is, suppose they want to ask you even a bigger question, then they will give you a second paragraph, subsequent measurement and accounting for a change in the lease term. Keep calculator ready. Listen to me carefully. Now what is my original lease term? 10 plus an option to extend for 5 years. And what we had decided initially, not to extend. So I chose 10 years for accounting purpose. But future is in the 6th year of the lease, 5 years are over, lessee acquires another entity called A. Now some event has taken place here in the life of this company, lessee. Now there is another entity A which has been acquired by this lessee, in whose book we are doing the accounting. Understand the story. Entity A has been leasing a floor in another building. So this company which we have acquired is operating in another building. The lease entered into by entity A contains a termination option that is exercisable by entity A. Following the acquisition of entity A, lessee needs 2 floors in a building suitable for increased workforce. Understood? First I was working on 1 floor. Now I require more space because of increased workforce. To minimize the cost, lessee A, point number A, enters into a separate 8-year lease of another floor in the building leased that will be available for use at the end of year 7, and B, terminates early the lease entered into by entity A with effect from beginning of year 8. So they have made this arrangement, entered into another lease and terminate the earlier lease entered into by entity A. Moving entity A's staff to the same building occupied by the lessee creates an economic incentive for the lessee. Why? If you work on 2 buildings and if you work in same building, which is more advantageous? Same building. If suppose you, in your own office, internal audit department is in one building and the accounts department is in another building, stat audit in another building, will it be easier for you to operate? Normally not. If you are in the same campus, easy to manage, economically also. So now they are saying moving entity A staff to same building occupied by lessee creates an economic incentive for the lessee to extend the original lease at the end of its non-cancelable period of 10 years. So now actually this is what is my starting point for further calculation. I have an option to extend the original lease after 10 years. The acquisition of entity A and the relocation of entity A staff is a significant event that is within the control of the lessee and affects whether lessee is reasonably certain to exercise the extension option not previously included in the determination of the lease term. So this was given to you as homework yesterday. You will find out what are the factors which may lead to change in your decision relating to exercising or not exercising the option. This is one example. This is because the original floor has greater utility and thus provides greater benefit to the lessee than alternative assets that could be leased for a similar amount to the lease payment for the optional period. Lessee would incur additional cost if it were to lease a similar floor in a different building because the workforce would be located in different buildings. Consequently, at the end of year 6, this is my useful sentence. Lessee concludes that it is now reasonably certain to exercise the option to extend the original lease as a result of its acquisition and planned relocation of entity A. Summary of the story is that after 6 years, we have decided to use the extension option. Forget now all the story given. You have only just justified why you want to extend. But for accountant, now we have come to a conclusion that the option would be exercised and therefore my lease term would change because it is more advantageous. Now same old boring question, will you use the revised discount rate or the original discount rate when the lease term changes? Revised discount rate. Okay. So lessees incremental borrowing rate at the end of year 6 is 6%. So this is, they have given also. Per annum, which reflect the fixed rate at which lessee could borrow an amount similar to the value of the right of use asset in the same currency for a 9-year term with similar collateral. Why 9 year is written? Why 10 is not written? Because the lease rentals are paid at the beginning. You see on the screen, you have to pay lease rentals at the beginning. Okay. So total 15 payments you have to make, including this additional lease term now which we have decided. We are changing the plan at the beginning of which year? In the 6th year. In the 6th year means I have made this payment, this. Okay. How many payments we have already made? 6 payments, because immediately at the beginning you have to make the first payment and such decisions will take some time to execute. So by that time your total number of payments made are 6. So now you have to make 9 more payments. If you count 6 to 14, there are 9 more payments left. So these 9 remaining payments will be now measured using 6% discount rate. Okay. Which then the lessee expects to consume the right of use assets future economic benefit evenly over the lease term and thus depreciate the right of use asset on a straight line basis. So see the calculation. First I will have to reach what was my balance at this point in my liability account and what was my balance in asset account. So this we have done up to 6th year because we have already made the 6th year payment. Is it right? 9 more payments are pending. So up to the end of 6th year we will prepare liability account. The original liability was 4,05,391, remember, but 50,000 was paid in advance in the first year. So my liability is 355,391. Interest will accrue. Interest will accrue for that year. So my closing liability will become, check the answer, 373,161. Okay. Now I'll just go to few slides back to make you understand again. If you see the entry, this entry we passed at the beginning of the year, right of use asset account debit to lease liability to cash. That means this entry was passed on say 1st January of the first year. But then I have to also pass entry for interest accrued. So this is my interest accrued. My closing liability would be 373,161. At the beginning of year 2, my balance is, keep checking, 373,161. First I will pay the installment. So in this problem what they have done in the presentation, which is a very nice thinking, first pay the amount, then calculate the interest. So my balance will become now 373,161 minus 50,000 into 5%. Interest accrued 15,158. Is it right? You have to calculate, no? And today as a homework you will practice also this question in the notebook separately. $16,158. Okay, in your book I have written 16,158. This is typo. So what is the balance? Is right balance 339,319? 339,319. 50,000 payment at the beginning of this year 3. Now take your calculator, first deduct this two figure. 14,466. Is it right? Keep checking. Afterwards you should not have any doubt. Okay. The student will send me the mail, sir, how this figure has come. I can't remember after 2 months how this figure has. Today only will clear all doubt. Is the number right? Take this number, minus 50,000 into 5%, 12,689 is right. Check. 266,474. Check. Next time I will not give you the answer, otherwise if you don't be active. 50,000. After deducting 50,000, take 5%. Is it 10823? I have a doubt. Check. Yes. Then balancing figure. 227,927. 227,297. 50,000. Now first you deduct this amount. 885 balance. Now this number you underline. This is my carrying amount of liability at the end of year 6. Is it right? So how many more payments are remaining? 9. So 9 more payment means next payment will be immediately at the beginning of year 7. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yes. How many payments we have made? 6 and 9 more. Why it is less? ठीक है. 15. This amount we are going to pay immediately now in the next period. And then 3 more amount I am going to pay in the next year, which will be 50,000. And these amounts I am going to pay, which will be 50, 55 or 54? 55,000. Is it somewhere mentioned above 55,000? Yes. So now we have to learn how to find out the present value of the liability at the either end of year 6 or beginning of year 7. Because my lease payments are going to change, I have to also consider 5 more payments. Number 1. Number 2, now because I am changing the lease term, the economics of lease has changed. So I will use a different discount rate also. Is it right? So even for this 50,000, I will use a different discount rate. But before that, we will also learn the movement in right of use asset. Right of use asset, you see, it's very easy. It is 4,20,391, and originally I had taken 10 year as a lease period, divide by 10. So every year you are going to write off 42,039. So after 6 years are over, just take your calculator, 4,20,391 into 4 by 10. Into 4 by 10. Is it 168,157? Why into 4 by 10? 4 years are pending, so this should be the balance. Quick check. So in the exam you don't have time. If they don't specifically require depreciation for individual year, then you can make this as a separate working note. Lease right of use asset carrying amount at the end of year 6. Opening balance into 4 by 10. That's it. Okay. Any query till now? Now the next complicated calculation is what would be your increase in lease liability. Are you with me? What would be your increase in lease liability? You have to pay, remember, 4 more payment of 50,000 and 5 more payment of 55,000. So at the end of 6th year, let us take the stock of situation. Lease liability is 186, 162. Interest expense of this year, we have already recognized 8865, not very important. And the carrying amount of ROUA is 168, 157. Now this calculation is important. Revised lease liability. I have to pay 50,000 in the 4 year, 55,000 in next 5 year. But that 50,000 that we have to pay is at the beginning. Beginning means from today 0, 1, 2, 3. From today, one payment today and 3 more payments in the next 3 years, because payments are made in advance in the beginning. So for calculating the present value factor, I will take present value factor of 0, 1, 2, 3. And the 55,000 will be paid for 5 times. The present value factor will be based on 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay. So try on your calculator. This calculation, those who want to write can write down. How this number given in your book has come, 378,174. You should be able to read and interpret the problems. So take 50,000 into PV annuity factor 0-3, because 6 years are over. The next payment is immediately due next year, next day, and 3 more. And what is the discount rate? 6%. And 55,000 into next 5 installments, which will be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 from time value perspective. Okay. So please do it yourself once. Afterwards you will not be able to understand. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This period we are going to pay 50,000, and this period we are going to pay 55,000. Is the calculation right? Some of you are working hard and some of you are hardly working. So is it right? Tell me. Yes. Some students have certified. 183, 650 this part, and 194, 524 this part. Is it right? Hello? You are about to become a professional. You should be able to do this much. If you don't know, then ask me. Done? Everybody done? Now let us go to the table which is printed in your note. What was the balance of liability at the end of 6 years? 186, 162. And what is your liability now? 378, 174. So increase in lease liability, underline 192,012. Increase in lease liability 192,012. What is the journal entry you will pass for this? Right to use asset account debit. In your book I have written the entry also. Right to use or right of use asset account debit 192,012 to lease liability 192,012. After this entry, the carrying amount of the asset will also change. Go to the table last line. What was the carrying amount of that asset after 6 years? 168, 157. And you also add 192,012. Is the total check 360, 169? Keep checking. At least one time you should check. No query will be entertained on this calculation afterwards, okay? Otherwise, I will charge you 300 rupees. From the beginning of year 7, lessee calculates interest expense at 6% per annum. Now, in case if they ask you in the exam, show the lease liability at the end of each year till year 15, then this is how your lease liability account would move on the screen in your book also. Only just we need to quickly check. 7th year beginning we will pass that entry. After that entry my lease liability will become 378,174. Is it right? Is this right? 378,174. Say yes. Yes. This is the liability we calculated in that working. And because the payment is made in advance, first I will write lease payment 50,000. Now what will be my interest rate here? What will be my interest rate? 6%? 6%. Check. 378, 174 minus 50,000, then into 6%. Are you getting 19690? Check the balance also. 347,864. Is it right? 347,864. Check it. Who is checking? You are checking? Next year. Quickly. Check all the interest and ending balance. Prepare this chart if they ask you in the exam for all the years. Okay. Check the depreciation also. How many years are remaining? 10 years. 10 or 9, sorry, 9 years. Divide by 9. 360,169. 40019. And what you have to do, your balance should become 0 after the last year. So you'll see the balance of both the lease liability and the asset becomes 0 after the lease term is over. Right. Will both of them be always 0? Not necessary. Because if you suppose you have a option to purchase and you decide to purchase, then in that case you will depreciate it over useful life, which may be more than the lease term. So therefore, in that case, there may be some balance left in the asset account, right? Pass journal entry as homework for 15 years. Will you be able to do? At least you can try. Every year you have to pass entry for interest, payment, depreciation. Okay? And also show the presentation in P&L account and balance sheet for 15 years. Lease modification. Lease modification. First you understand the meaning of modification. What is modification? A change in the scope of the lease. Previous two examples were not modification. Remember, that was within the scope of the lease. The lease agreement provided the option to extend. So I was not changing the scope of the lease. I was only using my option. Before that, the rental was based on index. So index changed. Scope of the lease has not changed. Change in the scope of the lease would be, suppose there is a property whose area is 20,000 square feet. You increase it to 3,000 square feet. I will take 1,000 more adjacent office. Reverse 2,000. You say no, I don't require so much. Maybe 1,000. Or the rent was 50,000 and then they increased it to 60,000, which was not in the original contract. So here, even though the scope does not change, but there is a modification in the lease. Or it can be the original was 3,000 square foot area for 10 years. Now we change it to 3,000 square foot area for 8 years or 15 years. That is also modification. So you have to now learn the accounting of modification. We'll take 2-3 examples on this. A lease modification is defined as a change in the scope of the lease. These are the example of change in scope of lease. It can increase the scope, it can decrease the scope, it can change the amount without changing the area. It can increase and decrease the scope, both. Increase and 2,000 to 3,000, increase in the scope from 10 year to 8 year. So simultaneously there is an increase and decrease also. So this will become a little more complicated problem. We will see both. Change in the scope of the lease or the consideration for a lease. This is the change in consideration. That was not part of the original terms and condition of the lease. That was not part of the previous problem. 50,000 for 10 year, 55,000 for last 5 year is not modification. It was part of the original terms of the lease. For example, adding or terminating the right to use one or more underlying asset. First example is adding. Second example is terminating. Suppose I have taken 2 floors on lease. We may terminate 1 floor. Or extending or shortening the contractual lease term. Now this example from 10 year to 8 year is shortening. If I make it 15, it will be extending the contractual lease term. But this is not in the original term. This is later they have modified the agreement. The effective date of modification is the date when both parties agrees to lease modification. So the accounting of lease modification will be on the effective date. Effective date means lessee and lessor both must agree on that date. Okay. The question, accounting question is whether we should account for modification as a new lease or the same lease will be adjusted. So the answer is it depends. If the following 2 conditions are satisfied, both must be satisfied, then you will treat the modification as a new lease and then you do a separate accounting for that as if it is another problem now for you. Okay. So a lease modification should be accounted as a separate lease if following 2 conditions satisfied. The modification increases the scope of the lease by adding the right to use one or more underlying asset. Modification increases the scope of the lease. So suppose you have taken first floor on lease, then you add second floor also. You have taken 5,000 square feet on lease, then you take another 5,000 SFT. The consideration for the lease, now this new lease that you are entering into, the consideration for the lease increases by an amount commensurate with the standalone price of the increase in the scope. So lease rental will increase based on standalone basis. That means had you taken a similar lease, you would have paid this much lease rental only. The consideration for the lease increases by an amount commensurate with the standalone price. So if suppose somebody independently goes and takes the second floor on rent, and suppose it is charged 50,000 rupees per annum, and this time also have to pay 50,000 per annum, this means it is commensurating with the standalone price. It is in line with the market price, you can say, for the increase in the scope, and any appropriate adjustment to that standalone price to reflect the circumstances in the particular contract. Now the lessor thinks, if I give it to rent to somebody else, I will earn 50,000 rupees. But then I will have to find a broker, I have to give an advertisement. So I have to incur some expenses, let's say 2,000 rupees I will have to incur. So why not to give this 2,000 rupees discount to this existing lessee only and enter into a deal with that? If that is the case, then also this condition is satisfied. Okay. If the lessor gives some discount, because for him he will not have to incur additional cost. Again, to find another lessee, you have to incur, but the same lessee says, I am willing to take it. So you save all those costs. That can be adjusted. But if the market rent is 50,000 and you give it for 10,000, because he is already an existing lessee for the first floor, then it is not in line with the standalone price, and you will not treat it as a separate lease. Rather, you will account for the existing lease and increase the lease liability and increase the right of use asset according to the new set of calculations. Okay. When both the conditions are met, not either or. Modification is considered to result in creation of a new lease. One more account you will open, right of use asset account, new lease debit to lease liability for new lease, and that is separate from original lease, and this will be accounted on its own. Now the agreement for the right to use one or more addition of asset is accounted as a separate lease or leases independently of the original lease. Now we will solve one case study problem.